So, South Africa, Australia, the first game of the Rugby Championship. Despite the score, I think it was an entertaining game for various reasons and a lot of interesting elements to it that I think will really play out from this very, very start, very early beginning from walking up to the World Cup. I think if we're talking in summaries of the game, if we're looking at both teams one at a time, I'll look at the Wallabies first. You got slapped. Okay, so the Wallabies, they got slapped.
Noah!
No doubt in my mind that that's what happened. But I think you've got some really solid things to take away from this. I think the scoreboard didn't really show how competitive you were for the first 50 minutes of the game. The Wallabies got behind early and they kept being worked over by very well worked tries. But I think they have a team there. I think the first thing they need to do is priority one, get their scrum and line out in order. At the moment, it's a 1 out of 10. It needs to be a 10 out of 10. At international level, you can't lose as many scrums and lineouts as Australia did and expect to win a game. Any game, really, unless you're playing like a second tier or a third tier team. And even then, if you're losing scrums against teams like that, you give them away in. In all honesty, I think Australia have got a lot to work with, but if I'm Eddie Jones, I'm spending the next week doing scrum and lineout drills and defensive drills. And that's it. This team needs to get a little bit harder. It needs to get harder. Seems like such a stupid thing to say, but they just need to get a little bit harder. Defensively, I don't know what happened. They kept committing too many people on the inside and leaving the wingers out on the outside. And when you have the wingers that South Africa do, you're going to get killed for it. But at the same time, there were some positives, I think, from Australia's attack. We didn't get to see a whole huge amount of it, but some of it was good. And I think if you're Australia, it's kind of taken the wind out of your sails a little bit. The feel-good feeling of Eddie Jones coming back, taking charge of your team. But you can also kind of tick this off as the first game Eddie's back in charge. He's playing South Africa in South Africa at altitude. It could be the slap in the face to basically have everyone just turn up a little bit more. So yeah, all's not lost. I don't think the score really reflected the game. I think there was a few tries in a row that South Africa got, which were well worked. I don't know. There's hope for Australia, I think. When you watch them play, you can see there's elements and little bits and pieces that show that they've got a very talented team. It's just it was completely inconsistent and it didn't mold together perfectly well. We'll see how they do in the future, but I think there's some positives to take from it, and I think it's quite obvious what you need to do over the next week in preparation for Argentina. I think it's Argentina they play. Could put my foot in my mouth with that one. From the South African point of view, so I doubted having someone come in for Pollard at 10, but I have to say I was massively impressed by Libbok. I'm not sure. Libbok, number 10 that came in for Pollard. I thought he was sensational, really. I think he started off a little bit slow, a little bit nervy, as anyone is to kind of come in and who hasn't had much test experience and you're playing such an important position. But I think he really settled into the game. And after about 15 minutes, he started playing the rugby that he wanted to play. And what do I mean by that? Well, I think today we saw a different South Africa from what we usually see. South Africa, for me, is classically very good defensive team, great forward pack that will win more scrums and lineouts and win some of the oppositions than most packs will. A number 10 that's a great decision maker and an excellent kicker. Backs that when they're given the ball, it's not going to happen every single play, but when they're given it, they know what to do with it and they don't make mistakes. And really, it requires that galvanized fly half to create the opportunities on the outside and recognize when it's time to go and when it's time to kick. And usually, fly half for South Africa he'll play two phases. If there's nothing going on, he's going to kick it to the opposition and let the defense take over. With Libbok, we saw a very different South Africa. A lot more willing to play from their own half. Ball distribution was great. Somehow managed to create space on the outside for the wingers that I still don't fully understand. I don't know if it was the Australian centre that was coming in a little bit too early and committing to a tackle because he thought there was a man on the overlap. But it was a different South Africa and a very interesting one. This is a South Africa that seems to enjoy playing with the ball in hand rather than just relying on the defense, which makes them a bit more versatile because I still think they can do what they usually do and grind out an opposition. But if you can have that attacking opportunity with Libbok at your fly half as well, you've you can play the game in multiple ways and win multiple ways, and that's a sign of a really, 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 really good team. I'm holding off giving my flowers completely to South Africa. I think there were a few mistakes that were a little bit like getting the rust off a little bit. Probably to be expected from people, a lot of players that haven't played the domestic rugby in a few weeks. I still think at this stage, I haven't. So I'm doing this review before I've watched New Zealand Argentina. But I still think at this stage, before watching the New Zealand Argentina game, I'm still taking New Zealand in the game next week. But there's a lot of positives here, a huge amount. And as I said in the preview show, I think if you got a good fly half coming in that plays well, gets a hot hand, then you stick with him. And Libbok really took his opportunity today. I think he played really, really well. I think there's got to be some special mentions in the back line that really helped him out. I think Esterhazen is somehow, even though he's absolutely massive, managed to have a quietly very good game. Ran the great lines, sucked in defenders when running forward, kicked and played some smart rugby to stretch the field a little bit. Willie LaRue was a fantastic safety valve for Libbok as well. He always seemed to be in the right position to receive kicks and always managed to kick them back very well. Didn't make a mistake all game, or maybe made one and I'm missing it. Sue me. I don't care. I think Willie LaRue really played a very kind of, what's the terminology I'm looking for? Very cool-headed game. Very calm, experienced presence at 15. And yeah, he really helped out, I think, Libbok, and being able, his safety in the back in the 15 allowed Libbok the ability to express himself how he wanted to and how he wants to play fly half. It's a really good mix that they've got there at fly half and fullback. I think the wingers, I don't know the wingers very well, but so I don't know their names. Apologies, but both of them sensational. I think the guy with the scrum cap, he just has a nose for the touchline. Sorry, not the touchline. That would be bad. He has a nose for the try line. He's really, really good. Knows where to take the ball, knows how to run a line, knows when to step inside, when to go down, when to pass, etc. And I think they've got a lot of positives. South Africa. I'm not running away with it because there were a lot of mistakes that were unforced and kicks that were a little bit like, ooh, they didn't look great. But I think it's going to be exciting next week. I still think, as I said, New Zealand are going to win, but I think next week is going to really be a bit of a cracker. Going to get in some notes, see if there's anything else here that I've missed. Yeah, I guess the reason I think the Wallabies were a bit more positive than the score suggests is that in the first half, I think they were competitive for sure. The floodgates really opened up from the second try from South Africa, where I had to make a special mention here. The second try by South Africa comes off a line out, and it's beautifully worked. It is line out to 3/4 of the way through the line out to kind of towards the back, to kind of give you space on the blind side. So you can tell just by that, this is all set up for this. You have your blindside flanker at the back of the maul, who's obviously going to make a decision on which direction he's going to go based on what's going on. He decides that there's space on the blind side, so he hits the blind side. The hooker has stayed out of the maul so that he can be an extra man. Blindside flanker passes to hooker, passes to winger, try. And there's so many things that have to go right for that to be successful, and to have the forwards doing all the decision making in there for the ball distribution. That was super impressive to me. If the 6 or the 2 either get tackled or get held up, they're completely isolated and the ball gets turned over and the move's over. But both of them ran fantastic lines, didn't keep the ball, and knew exactly where to look for that fantastic winger that I've been talking about. Sometimes, and maybe I'm reading a bit too much into that try specifically, but sometimes when you get so well worked by a move like that, you almost feel like, well, there's nothing I could have done against that. And then all of a sudden, the energy kind of just seeps out of your team. And maybe partly that happened today, especially being in South Africa. And I think they were already down 10 points by that point. And I think if you're down more than 2 tries against South Africa, I think mentally, it's a very uphill climb. So Ben O'Keefe, I think he had a good game. He missed one thing which really kind of made me yell at the TV. It was at the end of the first half. Australia had the advantage, and he stopped the advantage just as I thought they were going to make a break down the sideline. Yeah, I think Ben O'Keefe a very good, consistent game once again, like the Super Rugby final. I think he was very good in that, very consistent. Had that again today. But there was that one decision where I just went like, man. But referees are human, and that's one I can forgive for sure. And I think any fan or any player can forgive that for how good and how consistent he's been. And especially with the abuse that he's obviously been receiving ever since the final. I think he had a fantastic game. I got no qualms about Ben O'Keefe. I think he's one of the good ones for sure. South African scrum and line out, completely dominant throughout the whole game. Be interesting to see if that translates to the New Zealand game, where they've probably got, in my opinion, a much tougher pack to play against themselves. I would like to say, when you've got Will Skelton in your pack as well, I think you've got to be able to compete at least at line out time with Will Skelton in there. And I think there was probably like one line out in the second half where I saw that. So I don't know. There needs to be a lot done in the tight in terms of coaching and training for the Australia team. That was it, really. I think it was an interesting game, even though it wasn't a competitive game in the end. And I think there's hope for both of these teams. I think if you're Eddie Jones, you've got the classic quote, "I'm preparing for the World Cup." And I think there's probably some merit to that as well, to be honest with you. I think you can start to see how he's trying to form the team. But there's a lot of work to be done. And if you're South Africa, you're ending up with a dilemma yourself. You're ending up with, well, it's one performance, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. But you've got Libbok, who's had a great game today. Presumably, he's going to start against New Zealand next week. Another great test for him. And hell, if you've got two fly halves that play very different styles of rugby, you can play two styles of rugby. And it just means that if one style of rugby is not working in a quarterfinal or a semi-final or even a final, change fly half. You change it up, you know? Example, you start with Libbok in a game. Say you're playing, I don't know. I can't remember how all the trees line up, but you start with the Libbok in a game. You come up against France or Ireland, someone who's got a really aggressive defense. He's starting to get pummeled a little bit. You're down 3 points. You're 50 minutes into a game. Bring on Pollard. Ultimate manager of a pitch. Put yourselves in the right area of the pitch to compete. Tighten everything up. Take you 3 points every single time. It just gives you more available options. So I think they've got a lot to be excited about. Let's not get carried away. It's one game, but I'm really looking forward to see how he performs next week. Second game, New Zealand versus the Pumas. Puma pants, more like. Victory sip. I mean, there's not much to say, really. I think the All Blacks came out exactly the way that I thought they were going to come out. All guns blazing. I think 14 of them came out and played 10 out of 10 rugby for what they can play. I think the one exception was Mackenzie. I'm a big fan of D-Mac. I think he's a great player. I think he's fantastic, great to watch, and really can control a game. But I definitely think in the first half that he wasn't really the dominant force that he has been for the Chiefs this year. There was just like a lack of aura about him that he usually has, and he just seemed clunky. He seemed like the problems they had in attack. He was missing conversions. He wasn't making the right passes. He got charged down very, very early, literally the first play of the game, and almost got a try against him because of it. And he completely lost that kind of like Joker kind of look he does when he goes up and he's for every one of his kicks, he just kind of goes, he does the. And here we go. You know, he lost all of that. That was gone. And as you saw the game went on, he started feeling more comfortable giving it the old. I mean, there's not much else to say. I mean, I think the Pumas, I think they have more in them than they showed in this game. They got screwed over in all the scrums. Usually they're pretty good in scrums. Their rugby was not fluid at all. They did not know what they were doing going forward at all. They looked much better at the beginning of the second half. They came out in the second half how they probably would have in the first half. This might be another occasion where a team gets way too emotional and they just kind of like lose control. And they just kind of like lose it and they get rattled early because they come out with a lot of energy and like, oh, this is my home crowd and everything. And then they just kind of like straight like flop with the energy because they go down a few tries early and the entire energy what they have gets flip reverse completely. But yeah, I mean, if I'm New Zealand, I think Bowden Barrett at 15 is like really solid. Whether you go for Mwanga or you go for D-Mac at fly half, Bowden Barrett, not only does he know when to attack the line properly, that you can see on the break that he did on the outside and he did the pass back to Geordie and that was just chef's kiss, but he's also defensively so good. He knows where to position under the high ball, then knows the position of the field back to kick it back down to, knows where the touchline is. Just very, very good game manager. Kind of what we saw with Willie LaRue in the game against the Wallabies. So I think for me against South Africa, I think it's got to be Bowden Barrett at 15, and the thing is, I would straight away say Richie Mwanga start instead of DMAC for against the Springboks. But DMAC came into himself within 20 minutes of the game and kind of just found his form, found his feet, was back in the attacking prowess, was making some nice little slide cross kicks and all that jazz. So I don't know. I'm just a Richie Mwanga fan. So personally, I'd like to see the entire team that they had starting today, maybe plus Whitelock, maybe plus someone else in the pack. But I would have also probably liked to see Mwanga instead of DMAC next week. But we don't always get our wishes. And from what I hear with conversations with some of my friends, Mwanga seems to be in kind of the naughty bench for God knows what reason. Which is, yeah, it's a shame. I think he's a fantastic fly half. But yeah, that's it. I mean, I don't have too much more to say about this game. Really, it was pretty obvious who was going to win within the first 10 minutes of the game. So I think we're all looking forward to next week's fixtures more than anything. Next week's fixture. I mean, Australia Argentina would be cool too, but the South Africa New Zealand game will just be top notch. Anyway, I'll see you then.